This is section 1.1. In this section, one of the goals is to be able to translate English statements using variables and vice versa. That means when you have a statement that involves variables, you are able to translate that back into regular normal English without variables. The second objective is to learn some vocabularies, universal statement, existential statement, conditional statement, and combination of those statements. Now, let's first talk about variables. And what is a variable, by the way? I believe you already have the life experience of equations like this, square equals 1. So in this case, there's a variable right there. And this variable represents a value that is not known to you yet. You're looking for it. So it's a placeholder for that unknown value. And sometimes you also want to use a variable to represent something that is true for some properties for a situation, but you don't want to be restricted to a certain specific concrete value. In that case, you can use a variable as a placeholder to represent that property. And actually B is one of those examples, okay? So basically, if I have to just use only one word, I'm gonna just call a variable as placeholder. Now, the first objective is to translate some English statements like these. These are the English statements that without variable, and we are going to introduce variable and rewrite the statements with variables. And this is a very fundamental skill that everyone has to master so that you are able to write and read mathematical statements more effectively. Okay, so this is a very important skill. Now, what is the, if I have to give one advice, what would that be? That will be, if you see a noun, that will be a good, strong signal that you're going to introduce your variable. So for instance, let's take a look at the first statement. Are there numbers? Isn't that numbers? This is a noun, okay? So that's a good signal that I'm going to introduce variable. So are there numbers? What are the numbers? And seems to me there should be more than one number. I'm going to call two numbers, okay? So are there numbers X and Y? So because I smell that there's a more than one, so I'm going to call two. And with the property that the sum of their squares equals the square of their sum. So this statement doesn't explicitly say how many numbers, but I kind of feel like implicitly 2 is enough to represent the idea. So that's why I picked 2. So are the numbers X and Y with property that the sum of their squares? Well, you might think about, hey, sum isn't the sum a noun? You don't really have to introduce a new variable because sum of their squares can be represented by the variable you already introduced, X, Y, right? The sum of their squares, that means sum of the squares of the two variables you introduce, X plus Y squares, X plus Y squares. So this is we don't need a new variable here. Equals, that's where the equal sign comes in, the square of the sum. I'm sorry, certainly made a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Sum of their squares, right? So X square and Y square and the sum, that's what we're talking about. Sum of their squares equals, that's where the equal sign comes in. The square of their sum, the square of their sum. So this is what I really meant to write down, okay? So now, once you introduce the variable here, we can rewrite this, the first sentence. So are there numbers X and Y with the property, what kind of property? And this expression is the property. And oftentimes we use English word like such that this is true, like this is true. So do you see that I rewrite the statement without a sentence, without a variable into a sentence that has the variable. So that's the first step that we are going to do, introduce variable and we write it. Now I would encourage you to pause the video for a moment and then give a try on the BCD, and then and after a while, once you're done, and resume the video and let's check the answer. Once given new real number, okay, there's a noun here, so that's where I'm gonna introduce my variable and use have to, but you certainly are welcome. You can use X, of course. But if you don't want to use X, say if you say I'm gonna use Y, that's fine. So I'm gonna just say if you use Y. So given real number Y, comma, its square is non-negative. So this it refers to the variable you just introduced. So it's square, I'm gonna say Y square, right? A negative, non-negative. Now, if you want to more mathematical, you certainly are welcome to say, instead of saying y square is non-negative, you can say y square is like greater than 0. So either way, this is a little more mathematical. Introducing the variable is the goal in this example. C, given any two real numbers, now two real numbers, right? That's the noun. And obviously you have to introduce two variables. And I'm gonna introduce, do you have to use X and Y? You don't have to, you can use A or B. So I'm gonna use A and B. There is a real number in between. So there is a real number. Do you see this is another noun? So I'm gonna say C, okay? I'm gonna call this as C. There is a real number. Well, basically, it's just as simple as that. I'm going to save a little time without copying down the whole thing. The statement looks like this. Given any two real numbers, A and B, there is a real number C in between A and B. That's how you would do it. If you do want to be a little more mathematical, if you want to use inequality like C is in between A and B, we can do that. So let's give a try on that one. So given any two real numbers, A and B, comma, and you know, if you want to say C is in between A and B, right? So let's say, suppose C is greater than A, less than B. This can happen only if like B has to be greater than A. So I have to describe it somewhere. So I'm gonna say where A is less than B or B is greater than A. Okay, where A is less than B, and there is a real number. There is a real number C. Okay, real number C, and this is the property that we are expecting to happen. Oftentimes, when you say there is a real number C, then you're going to describe its property such that this is true. Okay, so now this is pretty mathematical. Usually, that's what we aim to. D, the reciprocal of any positive number is positive. So reciprocal is certainly a noun, but we don't want to introduce a variable for reciprocal because this reciprocal very closely related to any positive number, this number, right? So therefore, I would like to introduce a variable for this positive number, okay? So I'm gonna say for any positive number, say, I'm gonna just call it X. So if you read this statement, this is the subject, this is the verb, this is the object. This is property, this is positive. So the reciprocal, you don't need a new variable. Reciprocal means reciprocal of X, 1 over X, is positive. You can say greater than 0, or you can just use English is positive. So this is the objective number one. For the objective number two, there's another separate video. So this is the part one.